Using the wrong watercolor supplies or techniques can result in a lot of problems, from ending up with a real mess on your hands to completely ruining a painting, but I am covering some essential things you need to know in today's video that will help you stop making the same mistakes over and over again. Just quickly, if you are new around here, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell as well so you never miss an update from me. There are so many different brands of paper out there, and if you are new to using watercolor, it can be very confusing to know which paper you should be using for watercolor. A lot of people have made the mistake of using paper that is not suitable for wet mediums, for example printer paper, and if you use this type of paper it can cause a lot of problems for you. Printer paper or other unsuitable paper is often too thin and cannot absorb large amounts of water, so if you're trying to paint on this paper you can get a lot of warping and puddles, and the water can completely soak through the paper, causing it to tear. If that happens, then your artwork will be completely ruined, so you must use a paper that is suitable for watercolor only. It can get very confusing having so many types of papers to choose from, but the most important things to remember is to choose a watercolor paper. It can be hot pressed or cold pressed. Hot pressed is a smoother surface paper and cold press has a rougher texture, and either one is fine. It's completely up to you which one you prefer to use. Watercolor paper should also be at least 140 pound or 300 GSM squared in weight, and this is so that it can absorb large amounts of water. Anything that is less than 140 pound or 300 GSM squared is not suitable for watercolor. Picking watercolor paints is really important to ensure that you're creating artwork that is going to have a lot of color saturation and will be long lasting. Again, there are hundreds of different watercolor brands out there, and it can be very difficult to know which ones are good and which paints you should avoid. I would definitely avoid using watercolor paints that are typically used for children, so for example paints that you would find in the children's section of an art store, or paints from the dollar store or cheap supermarket paints. These paints are often not very good quality, so they'll often be quite chalky and won't lay very well onto the paper. But that doesn't mean that you have to spend excessive amounts of money on watercolor sets. There are some great affordable student grade watercolor sets suitable for your paintings. I have the Winsor and Newton cotman watercolor set in 45 half pans. They are classed as student grade and they cost around £30, and I use them for all of my watercolor paintings. I would recommend that when you are looking around for paints, try and read some reviews on them first to see what other artists have to say about them, and consider buying a small set first to see if you like them. It's important to invest in paints that have a good colour pigment and that colours don't fade too much when they dry. A high light fast rating means that colours are resistant to fading in natural light, and colours that mix well with water and create fluid results. So what about brushes? Again, there are thousands of paintbrushes out there, and if you are new to watercolor or painting in general, it can be so hard to know which brushes are the best to use. There are lots of different types of brushes, but the most common are flat or edged brushes and rounded brushes. So let's talk a little bit about those brushes and what they are used for. First up, we have the flat brushes, and these brushes are great for creating lines or sharp edges, and they are also great for some effects as well, especially to create a starry effect in watercolor backgrounds. There are lots of different size paintbrushes as well, ranging from small precision brushes great for details, medium sized brushes and large brushes to cover large surface areas. Depending on what you are painting, you may find that you will need to use lots of different types of brushes and different sized brushes. For example, if you're painting a landscape and you're painting the sky and some trees, maybe even a mountain, then there will be a lot of different textures in that painting, so different brushes may need to be used for that painting. You do want to avoid brushes that are not in good condition, for example brushes with loose or scratchy bristles, or brushes that are coated in paint or other residue, because that could transfer onto your paintings. Rounded brushes are great for most paintings because you'll be able to get into all the corners and areas of a painting. A rounded paintbrush with firm bristles is best because you'll have more control of where the watercolour goes. There are lots of great brands of paintbrushes, but my personal favourites are the Daler Rowney paintbrushes, as they're good quality but also very affordable. It's very important to keep your brushes in good condition though, so washing them in between use is very important so that they keep their shape and stay clean. Watercolours are a very loose medium to work in, so you won't have a lot of control over them. It's really important that you use careful techniques so that you don't start getting effects you don't want. The biggest tips I have when it comes to techniques is to really plan where you want your watercolours and what type of effect you are going for. If you are a beginner to watercolour, I would definitely recommend practicing different techniques and watercolour effects on scrap pieces of paper before you complete a full painting. By taking the time to practice different techniques and getting used to watercolours, it will really help you understand them better and learn from your mistakes. Watercolours can be really hard to get the hang of, and you'll get different results each time you use them. When I first started using watercolours, I noticed my paintings were very hit and miss, so it took a lot of practice and patience to really refine my skills. Another thing that helped me improve my techniques was definitely self-critiquing my work. After I had completed a painting or a certain effect, I would pick 3 things I liked about that painting and 3 things I felt I needed to improve. This really helped me to hone in on my skills and improve in the areas that I felt needed work on. You can always ask someone else what they think of your work and if they have any suggestions for you and how you can improve. It's also really important to be patient with watercolours and allow time for layers to dry. By building layers gradually, you can add a lot more colours and effects to your piece and get the results you are wanting. It's very easy to use the wrong amount of watercolour alongside watercolours, and water control is one of the most important parts of painting, because if you don't use the correct amount, then it can ruin your painting. Again, this is something that takes a bit of practice, and if you haven't really used watercolours before, then I would practice water control on a scrap bit of paper. As a general rule of thumb, I try to use 2 parts water to 1 part watercolour. That should give you the perfect consistency for your watercolours. So what would happen if you did use the wrong water control? Well, if you use too little water, then the watercolours won't be very fluid and they won't move very much. If you're creating a very textured piece, then using a little bit of water might work well for you for that type of texture, but if you want areas that flow a lot, you'll need more water. If you use too much water, then this can create a lot of puddles where water collects in one area. It can also warp the paper, and in extreme cases, if too much water has been applied to the paper, it can actually damage the tooth of the paper or rip the paper altogether. The correct amount of water shouldn't form any puddles or large amounts of water and should still be quite fluid. There should be some movement of watercolour, but it should dry quite quickly and not disturb the natural shape of the paper too much. So those were my top tips for avoiding the most common watercolour mistakes, and I really hope that this video has helped you if you are experiencing any of these issues. If you have any helpful tips for improving watercolour paintings, then don't forget to leave a comment down below. I have loads of new watercolor videos coming to my channel soon, so make sure you are subscribed with the bell on so you don't miss an update from me. Thank you so much for watching, and of course I will see you soon. Keep creating, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!